I always call this the so-called peace process deliberately because words have meaning. And the reason why I say that is because this so-called peace process led to Israel, by way of Benjamin Netanyahu and every other person that came after, to continue pushing the fake peace process negotiations over and over again and destroying them in the exact same way that they have done so in this ceasefire negotiations bargaining over the past 2 years. Anyway, let's hear what John Oliver had to say. I suspect that he won't go as hard as he should be at this point.
Our main story tonight concerns forced monkey labour on coconut plantations. It is real, by the way. Monkeys are apparently captured and raised to harvest coconuts. And you're probably thinking, oh, this is going to ruin coconuts for me, isn't it? I'm never going to be able to enjoy them again without the mental image of a chained-up monkey forced to work long hours in the Thai sun for pay that is, I'm guessing, well below Thai monkey minimum wage. Well, I've got some good news. We're not actually talking about blood coconuts tonight. That was just a decoy, so you'd be less bummed out when I revealed our real topic, Israel. Now, oh yes, oh, suddenly, forced monkey labour sounds pretty good to you, doesn't it? Oh, please, John, tell me about the sad monkeys. Is one name...
My suspicion, I haven't even seen this yet, but my assumption here, without even watching it, is that this is going to be above and beyond for mainstream news. This is the, but of course, it will be substandard to make an assessment of the exact severity of the that Israel's committed to, whether it be like describing it as like Benjamin Netanyahu's or Zionism and things of that nature. I don't think will be discussed in this. Yeah. But once again, you got an indirect call out in this piece. The writers are mocking you. What do you mean? Why?
Bobo, is he already dead? No, sorry, you had your chance. We're doing Israel. Israel is a country that I'm guessing you're already aware of, but in case you need a primer on its exact size and location, here is someone with a helpful visual.
It's a small country in terms of land. See this pen, this wonderful pen? My desk is the Middle East. And this pen, the top of the pen, that's Israel. That's not good, right? You know, that's a pretty big difference. I use that as an analogy. It's pretty accurate, actually.
So, that's objectively very funny, from him calling the pen wonderful to holding it up vertically, the only wrong way to hold it if you're comparing it to a country on a horizontal map, to taking credit for that analogy as if it weren't definitely how an exhausted aide just taught him the size of Israel minutes before. Specifically, we're going to talk about Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, Bibi if you're nasty, otherwise known as the original source material for Mr. Potato Head. Netanyahu has been in power on and off since 1996, to the point that he's actually Israel's longest-serving prime minister. And for decades, he's portrayed himself as the only person capable of keeping Israel safe, sometimes making that argument through fun campaign ads like this one, where a couple are getting ready to go out, wondering where their babysitter is, when this happens.
Oui, ראש הממשלה. מה אתה עושה פה? הזמנתם בייביסיטר? קיבלתם ביביסיטר. איפה הילדים?
אבל אתה ראש הממשלה. אתה תשמור לנו על הילדים?
בבחירות הקרובות, אתם בוחרים מי ישמור על הילדים שלנו. בבחירות הקרובות, מצביעים רק הליכוד.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the name BB does kind of sound like the word baby, but it is a bit of a stretch, though to be fair, it's not the worst use of a nickname in a political campaign, because that would be when Richard Nixon was the subject of campaign buttons that said, "My pick is..." which would actually be a great prop for a gender reveal party. Come in, guess how many diapers, then grab a button that's either "My pick is" or "I got..." Bad news, the losing team has to listen to the mother-in-law tell her birth story. Netanyahu's argument to voters has always been that he's a big, strong guy who won't let Israel get pushed around. And even some of his most ardent supporters describe him as a belligerent piece of shit. Here are some explaining their support for him ahead of an election in the 90s.
Only Bibi. He's the #1 politician in the country. Bibi Netanyahu. He has a mouth that can wrap the whole country around his finger.
We need a prime minister to stand up to the world, not a sucker. Someone who knows how to lie, too. We need a prime minister who's an asshole son of a bitch.
Wow! That is pretty damning. What kind of person are you when even your biggest fans are going, "This guy's a nightmare, it's a yes from me"? Also, stop interviewing that guy while he's still driving. No one wants a news alert that says 12-car pile-up on the highway. We were first on the scene because we kind of caused it. And in recent years, Netanyahu's pushed that whole notion of a strong offence to the absolute limits. Just this year, he's continued to preside over the longest war in Israel's history. He's starved Gaza, bombed Iran, and carried out airstrikes in Qatar, Yemen, Syria, and Lebanon. It seems like someone gave him a rise and grind coffee mug, and he took it sociopathically literally. But it is worth knowing Netanyahu and his coalition are not currently that popular in Israel. Polls continue to show his coalition would lose the next election were it to...
Okay, chatters, he has recognized that Israel's committing a before. It's not... And John Oliver has kept up the coverage on Israel's belligerent nature also. I think he's just saying war in this circumstance to talk about the belligerent nature of Israel and like the way it's conducting its war.
Be held today, and many of his fellow politicians don't seem big fans either, with Bibi's former ambassador to the US saying he's unable to distinguish between personal and political interests, and even this minister in his government calling him at one point a danger to the state of Israel, which is pretty direct from a political ally. In this country, the most damning thing a Republican's been brave enough to say publicly about Trump was Mitch McConnell suggesting we're living through a time with certain similarities to the 30s. And if you're thinking, wait, did he mean that thing or just that ankle hemlines are coming back in fashion? The answer's neither. He was apparently referring to the Smoot-Hawley tariff bill, which is definitely where all our heads went when he dropped the 1930s reference. But despite all that, Netanyahu always seems to find a way to hang on to power. He's been unseated as prime minister twice, only to come back each time. The point is, years from now, when people tell the story of Israel's brutality in Gaza, they'll need to talk about the history of Israel's founding mission, the complex politics of the Middle East, America's choice to give more military aid to Israel than any other country in history, and 1,000 other things. But they'll also need to tell the story of one Benjamin Netanyahu, a man so singularly focused on remaining in power, he's allied with the most extreme voices in his country. So given that, tonight, let's talk about Netanyahu. And let's start with some background. He grew up with a father who was a well-known proponent of an uncompromising form of Zionism called revisionist Zionism, which focused on the need for a military force strong enough to compel the Arabs to accept a Jewish state on their native land. Bibi actually spent...
Okay, so the focus is on Benjamin Netanyahu entirely, which makes sense. Never mind. I thought that he was going to talk about that, but this is obviously a piece that is almost entirely comprised of Benjamin Netanyahu's rise to political power, and he will draw inferences to like Israeli society overall. I don't think this is to scapegoat Benjamin Netanyahu as a singular figure, but I don't know if he will go hard enough from
formative years in the US, attending high school in Philadelphia. In his mid-20s, his brother Yoni, a commander in the IDF, was killed while rescuing more than 100 Israelis who'd been taken hostage after a plane hijacking, and he was hailed as a national hero. And following that, Bibi, who was still living in the US and going by Ben Nitai, began to get more attention, and he got pretty good at arguing Israel's case. Here he is on a Boston-area TV show.
Mr. Netanyahu,
I remember this.
Is the issue of self-determination the core of the conflict in the Middle East?
No, I don't believe it is. The real core of the conflict is the unfortunate Arab refusal to accept the state of Israel.
Yeah, that was a young Netanyahu defending Israel on Boston TV. That programme, by the way, Tark and Sacks with Chip and Chowder. Over the years, the show's held some surprisingly nuanced debates on issues like the Mideast conflict, as well as exactly how many penises Derek Jeter could fit in his mouth. Now, after returning to Israel, Netanyahu got into international diplomacy, becoming ambassador to the UN, and ultimately moved into politics as chair of the right-wing Likud party, where he made his name campaigning against the historic Oslo Accords. They, famously, laid out a framework for Israel negotiating peace with the Palestinians. And Netanyahu, in particular, railed against the prime minister who...
So, for the record, like, my assessment here is that I always call this the so-called peace process deliberately because words have meaning. And the reason why I say that is because this so-called peace process led to Israel, by way of Benjamin Netanyahu and every other person that came after, to continue pushing the fake peace process negotiations over and over again. and destroying them in the exact same way that they have done so in this ceasefire negotiations bargaining over the past 2 years, identically, for the record. Back in the day, you couldn't say this because there weren't enough eyeballs. There were only some silent recognitions of the fact that America played a formative role in allowing Israel to expand greatly over the West Bank and render a two-state solution impossible. Back in the day, you wouldn't be able to get away with saying, like, Israel was always the spoiler in the peace process, in the negotiations, and they had no design to implement the peace negotiations whatsoever. And the Oslo Accords were done to basically neuter Yasser Arafat and the PLO and pack them up in their entirety, which is precisely the reason why when Arafat went into the Oslo Accords, he was unimaginably popular. But by the end of his life, the PA and Fatah were unimaginably unpopular, which led to the rise of Hamas and other forms of militancy against Israel. Make sure you understand this, because Israel, every step of the way, destroyed any notion of negotiations, and America, just like under the guidance of Anthony Blinken with Joe Biden and also with Witkoff and Donald Trump, played the role of protective cover for Israel, laying the blame squarely on Arafat. Remember that. They did this over and over again in the exact same way that they're doing this right now. So make no mistake, it was not different back then either.
Signed those accords on Israel's behalf, Itzhak Rabin. Bibi went scorched earth, even speaking at an infamous rally where the crowd burned images of Rabin in a Nazi uniform and chanted for his death. Just a month later, he was assassinated by a far-right extremist, and many blamed Netanyahu for stoking the anger that led to that assassination, including Rabin's widow.
To what extent do you blame Mr. Netanyahu and the Likud for what has happened?
I do.
Benjamin Netanyahu also had a psychopathic response to this, by the way. I don't know if they'll show this, but he literally said, "I was going to beat him anyway. I wish he was alive to see me beat him." Something along those lines, which, for the record, is not even untrue. At least at the according to the polls at the time, yes, the Oslo Accords, like triggering the Oslo Accords, was broadly rejected by Israeli society.
I do blame them. The rally in Kikar Zion in Jerusalem that showed him in the uniform of a Nazi. So Mr. Bibi Netanyahu, now we can say from here to eternity that he didn't support it and didn't agree with it, but he was there and he didn't stop it.
Right. Now, Netanyahu denies inciting political violence, and in his defense, it's not like he was filmed leading a mock funeral procession before Rabin's death with a coffin labelled Rabin Zionism in Hebrew, except, of course, he was very much filmed doing exactly that. There is Netanyahu right in front of one of the bluntest and most unfortunate metaphors imaginable. Honestly, the only way that could get any more on the nose is if he'd held a sign reading plausible deniability and burned that too. Now, in the wake of Rabin's assassination, many thought Netanyahu was politically finished, but the next year, a series of Hamas suicide bombings seemed to turn the public mood towards his case that pursuing peace was pointless, and Netanyahu was elected prime minister for the first time in 1996. It's a position that he served in, on and off, for 17 of the last 30 years. And a key claim he's repeatedly made is boasting that he can bring the US along with whatever he does. Here he is in 2001, during a period out of power, talking to settlers in the West Bank and explaining that if back in charge, he'd be able to aggressively support them and convince America to back him.
The world won't say anything.
I don't think this is correct. I think that I think that it wasn't just the Hamas bombings. I think that Israeli society very clearly, like the majorities of Israeli society, very clearly did not even want any recognition of Palestinian statehood and despised the Oslo Accords. Was there a much larger population in Israel at the time that wanted a two-state solution in comparison to Israeli society now? That is true. Okay. Otherwise, you wouldn't have Rabin taking the initiative at all. Having said that, is that useful to point out, though? Yes, it is useful to point out. The reason why it's useful to point out is because we didn't come here, we didn't get to the point of full-blown fascist Zionism, ultra-nationalist, exterminationist Zionism out of nowhere, okay? A society that looked at any recognition, which Rabin's own admission was a not full-blown statehood for the Palestinians, but something, a state minus, I believe he referenced it as at the time, leading up to the Oslo Accords. He literally said that it wasn't a full-blown state recognition for the Palestinians. It was less than a state, right? And Rabin himself was also not exactly a peacekeeper either, okay? He was famous for demanding in the First Intifada, as the head of the internal security, to break the hands of all the Palestinians, because the symbol of resistance in the First Intifada was like throwing rocks at armored personnel carriers. And they did. Thousands of children had their hands broken and arms broken at the directive of Rabin, for the record, to destroy the symbol of resistance. Because we say the First Intifada was fought with work stoppages and rocks, basically, even though it did ultimately turn into an incredibly bloody affair for the Palestinians, of course, as always. And the second one, in the aftermath of numerous acts of that the Palestinian civilian population was subjected to, both in the hands of the Israeli occupational forces and also in the hands of direct violence coming from psychopathic Kahanis, for example, that their methods actually evolved and they did become more bloody. They did start targeting civilians, for example, instead of just simply targeting the occupational forces and the police force. They started targeting civilians with the bus bombings and whatnot. That was the second Intifada. But the intensity of the violence in resistance against the apartheid was, as always, set by the occupational forces. The more violent the occupational forces got, the more violent its response got. People try to make it seem as though the Palestinians were not a partner in peace. Meanwhile, they refuse to reckon with Israel's, they refuse to reckon with the much more consequential aspect of Israeli society and their lack of recognition or their lack of interest in negotiating with the Palestinians at all.
The world will say that we are protecting.
Aren't you afraid of the world, Bibi?
Especially today with America. I know what America is. America is something that can be easily pushed to the right direction.
Wow. America can be easily pushed. Even if that is true, it's insulting to hear out loud. If I heard someone on my staff say, I know how to get John to do exactly what you want. He's so horny for horses. Just show him this picture and he'll forget the next three things you say. I'd be 1, furious, 2, intensely curious to see that picture. And I can't remember what the third thing is. Just show me that photo right now. And to be fair, Bibi has had a lot of success in pushing America, particularly with Republican presidents and especially with Donald Trump. In fact, it was during Trump's first term that Netanyahu celebrated what he considered his greatest foreign policy triumph, the Abraham Accords, which normalised diplomatic relations with several Arab states, most notably the UAE and Bahrain. It was a plan supported by Jared Kushner, who Trump, of course, put in charge of fixing the Middle East during his first term, even though he always looks like he just got his hair cut while sitting in a plastic race car chair. The thing about the Abraham Accords was they got those other nations to abandon the long-standing condition among many Arab countries that relations with Israel could only come after the establishment of a Palestinian state. Netanyahu's thinking was, if you can just get enough Arab nations to do that, you could basically freeze the Palestinians out. He's been trying to get Saudi Arabia to sign on next, but it's worth knowing many observers have warned that these accords were always just going to end up further marginalising Palestinians.
He said, we are going to have peace with Saudi Arabia, and the Palestinians should not have a veto on that.
I've long sought to make peace with the Palestinians. But I also believe that we must not give the Palestinians a veto over new peace treaties with Arab states.
Which is, in a different language, from my point of view, the Palestinians can off. Sorry, but excuse my French.
I'm sorry, but I will not excuse your French. The only person allowed to say while discussing diplomatic complexities on TV is me, because if I lose that, I'm little more than a streamer explaining the news so that a 14-year-old can swipe past me without noticing that, unlike most streamers, I'm in a very expensive room. But second,
my room is also expensive. Look at all the fan art and trinkets. My room is nicer than your room, bitch. Just saying. Mogged by John Oliver. Bro, I mock John Oliver every day because of his overall refusal to entertain coming on the HasanAbi broadcast, okay? That's how I mog him. All of you that are in this chat that I know for a fact there are writers in that writer's room that are in this chat all the goddamn time. And not a single one of you has been able to bring him over here, okay? It's ridiculous. Stop negging, it doesn't work.
Of course it was a view to the Palestinians. That shouldn't be surprising. Everything Netanyahu does has that as a side effect. If he could pour a bowl of cereal in a way that makes conditions in Gaza meaningfully worse, he would do that. And don't think that he doesn't have Israel's top geopolitical cereal scientists working on how to make that dream come true. But obviously, while many focus on Netanyahu's foreign policy, he's also a domestic leader. And at home, his time in office has increasingly been defined by attempts to cling to power, even as he's faced allegations of corruption, including charges of bribery and fraud in 3 separate cases. And while he denies those charges, to run through them very quickly, the first accuses him of accepting nearly $300,000 in gifts, including cigars and champagne from prominent businessmen. And I will say, it is not a great look that one of those businessmen has testified that Bibi and his wife used code words for the gift, with cigars being called leaves and champagne being called roses, which is just inherently suspicious. People only used code words for illicit activities, as anyone who's ever been disappointed by a Craigslist ad offering to go skiing with Tina Turner has discovered. Wait, hold on, that means cocaine and meth? Oh no, I was looking for a different kind of great time. The 2 other cases both accuse him of quid pro quos involving major news platforms, this newspaper and this website, Walla. In that case, prosecutors say he granted regulatory favours to the owner of Walla in exchange for positive coverage of himself and his wife. And just listen to Walla's former editor-in-chief explain how particular Netanyahu could be.
Netanyahu wanted positive coverage so that anyone who visits Walla frequently would think he's the King David of Israel, that he's the...
Do you guys understand why this is like, this is significant, right? This is a significant prosecution, but like understand that this is marginal in comparison to the internationally recognized crimes that he has committed. So if he thinks that he can avoid a genocide charge, this is not an issue for him at all. Like, sure, it plays a role in his considerations, but I think, he can avoid that by just going to America, okay?
Wonderful leader leading Israel. He wanted his wife to be pleased, that she'd look good in photographs. How many photos were there? How were the photos? Did they have the right angle? We felt like a restaurant serving only...
Is it a crime is it a crime to be a wife guy? Is it a crime to make sure that everyone knows your wife is the apple of your eye?
One person. He arrives and he wants that meat and this salad and gets whatever he wants. So we used code words like parsley was the request for more photos. Add lots of parsley to the dish coming out.
It's true, apparently lots of parsley meant more photos, which is kind of brilliant because no one would ever say add more parsley about their actual food. Parsley tastes like nothing. It's like Shrek trimmed his pubes while standing directly over your soup. It's fine, Shrek, it's fine. I'll just eat around it, it's fine. Netanyahu is supposed to finish testifying this year, but has tried to drag out the process to the point that it could still take years to reach a verdict. And crucially, if convicted, he could be sentenced to up to 10 years in prison for the bribery charge and up to 3 for fraud and breach of trust, which is a lot for a guy pushing 76 and who's allegedly spent years mainlining free cigars and champagne. And he's not the only one in his family who enjoys a lavish lifestyle. Take Bibi's 3rd and current wife, Sarah. She's been called Israel's Marie Antoinette and has famously been accused of abusive behaviour towards her household staff, which she both denies and has twice paid out damages for. Bibi and Sarah have also been accused of misspending taxpayer money, from $1,700 on scented candles to $127,000 to have a plane fitted with a double bed to attend the funeral of Margaret Thatcher. And to be fair, scented candles and the sight of Thatcher's corpse, they needed that bed on rock hard even thinking about it. Now, in 2019, Sarah even accepted a plea bargain to settle accusations she spent $100,000 in public funds to order meals from celebrity chefs. And I cannot think of a single celebrity chef I would spend that much on, except, what's his face? The one who's yelling all the time. No, not him. Yes, that's the one. That is the one. Now, when those charges first arose, Sarah tried to get out in front of them by giving a reality host a tour of their official residence to try and show off their modest lifestyle. And she seemed delighted to have him joke about the squalor that they were forced to live in.
I think that this door has been painted 1,000 times.
It's been painted a lot.
What is this?
A lamp just broke and it was glued.
What is this? I'm sorry, what is this? Wow, I'm in shock that this is your kitchen. It looks like the kitchen of a boarding school in Romania in 1954. What's this here in the back? This here is the closet? I think Anne Frank is hiding here in the back.
Whoa. Wow! Unless there is a second Anne Frank that I'm unaware of. That is a rough reference to 8 people live here of an organised system of ethnic extermination because these cabinets are ratchet. And while Sarah is giggling and smiling there, she has a temper. In 2002, she was recorded saying, "Bibi is bigger than this country. Why should he even bother? We'll move abroad and the whole country can burn." And while I don't need to show you this next clip, I do want to, because back in 2009, a newspaper gossip column published an item about Sarah attending a charity event, but didn't mention her professional credentials. It's a slight that she then discussed with one of her aides on a call that it turns out was recorded. And it is a lot.
I didn't even know this. I didn't even know she was I just assumed she was a demon because she's married to a demon. I didn't know how demonic she got. Oh, God. It's just like the arrogance, the entitlement, the constant nuisance behavior. Ugh. God damn, she sucks.
Oh, my God. That is just an iconic meltdown. If that happened today, we'd have been buried under 8 solid months of TikToks using the sound psychologist, B-A-M-A. That should be put on the diva Mount Rushmore of lashing out alongside Reese Witherspoon's You're About to Find Out Who I Am, Will Smith's Slap, and Christian Bale's Oh, Good for You. And I don't say that lightly. Now, the drumbeat of scandals surrounding Netanyahu and his reactions to them led more centrist parties in Israel to decide they wouldn't form a coalition with him, forcing him to drift to the right. So, when he returned as Prime Minister in 2022, it was by relying heavily on 2 constituencies even further to the right than he is, the ultra-Orthodox religious parties and the far-right ultra-nationalists. And they are extreme, because his inner circle now includes people like Itamar Ben-Gvir, a man once labelled the David Duke of Israel, a nickname I'm pretty sure would make the actual David Duke's head explode. It's like calling someone the J.K. Rowling of trans people. How does that work exactly? Netanyahu...
Well, it actually works perfectly fine because Itamar Ben-Gvir is the head of the Jewish Power Party, and he is perhaps one of the most relentless examples of Jewish supremacist ideals. So, yeah. Also, Caitlyn Jenner is probably the J.K. Rowling of trans people, if we're being real.
Who has made Ben-Gvir National Security Minister, and he is a hardline believer in the settler movement, which, as we've discussed on the show before, aims to establish enough settlements in the occupied West Bank to essentially annex the territory, despite most of the world and international law recognising those settlements as illegal. Ben-Gvir's history of extremism goes way back, though. On his first date with his future wife, they visited the grave of an extremist settler who in 1994 gunned down 29 Muslim worshippers, which doesn't just reflect badly on him, it reflects badly on his wife too. Because
this was the incident, Baruch Goldstein. This is the act of terror that changed the calculation for Palestinian resistance. It's broadly recognized as the reason for why the Second Intifada had civilian targets as well. They only after Baruch Goldstein did the Palestinian resistance forces decide to no longer only target the Israeli occupational forces and the police, but instead civilians as well. So whenever people talk about like bus bombings, this is the inception. This is the reason. This is how the response from the Palestinian resistance groups changed.
That should have raised a lot of questions, none of them being, do you want to go on a second date? And here's Ben-Gvir, shortly before Rabin's assassination, bragging about having gotten close enough to Rabin's car to steal his hood ornament.
You managed to remove the emblem from Rabin's car.
An emblem is a symbol, and this symbol shows that just like we can get to Rabin's car, we can get to Rabin.
That is chilling. And for what it's worth, I'm not even sure Rabin would have got that message, because when he noticed his hood ornament was gone, I'm guessing he thought, oh shit, some arsehole stole the little Cadillac thing from my hood, and not, uh-oh, I shouldn't have signed the Oslo Accords. I better unsign it before they come back for my hubcaps. Since then, Ben-Gvir has been convicted on at least 8 charges, including supporting a terrorist organisation and incitement to racism.
I always used to stress before October 7 when talking about Itamar Ben-Gvir that Israeli society is unimaginably racist, as you guys know, because of Zionism, right? Zionism is an incredibly racist ideology, whether it's a liberal version of it or not, doesn't fucking matter. But even in a Zionist society, Itamar Ben-Gvir was considered too racist to be in the Israeli occupational forces. To understand, like, how insane he is, that you know what the fucking IDF does. You know how they operate. You know what they do. They do genocide, right? The very fact that he was considered too fucking racist to serve in the Israeli military is insane shit. And now he's running the fucking country.
In fact, as recently as 3 years ago, Netanyahu refused to share a stage with him or even be seen with him in photographs, once saying he was not fit to be a member of his government. But now, of course, he very much is. Then there's Bezalel Smotrich, Netanyahu's finance minister. Smotrich once called himself a proud homophobe and helped organise an anti-gay beast parade, as if the phrase beast parade didn't already sound like the most out and proud thing on earth. It sounds like a brand of poppers that's been recalled. It sounds like a Fire Island party where the only dress code is edible. It sounds like a bar in WeHo where a lost tourist from Iowa just woke up to the rest of his life. Smotrich is a willful provocateur, often saying things like this on the floor of the Knesset.
Thank you, Chairman. My fellow members of Knesset, I want to stand here and say unequivocally, there is no such thing as the Palestinian people, period. There is...
Wait, that's not anywhere near the worst thing he said. He has literally said he doesn't want his wife to be in the same maternity ward with an Arab, as in the Palestinian citizens of Israel, okay? Because that Arab child, the Palestinian citizen of Israel, that's supposed to be a full-blown, fully fleshed out, recognized citizen of Israel, of Palestinian descent, a non-Jew, will grow up to inevitably kill them, will grow up to be a terrorist. He has also said that he is openly a fascist, that he doesn't have any issues with that.
None. There was none, period.
Yeah, pretty offensive, and while he's clearly saying that to get a reaction there, the phrase, there's no such thing as the Palestinian people, also sounds like something that Smotrich says to help himself climax. This man is an unapologetic extremist. He suggested that the starvation of Gazan civilians, a war crime, may be just and moral, and he's led the cause for the West Bank.
Yeah, the second part of that quote is also really important, as we covered at the time. He said, Israeli Minister Bezalel Smotrich says it may be moral to starve 2 million Gazans, but no one in the world would let us, except he then followed through on that quote later and said, we have, a year after the fact, he basically said, we have stopped and starved all of the Palestinians, and the world has let us. The world has allowed us to do everything we want to the Palestinian population. He did openly say that.
And he's led the cause for the West Bank to be annexed. And that is just two of the, to use a polite term, absolute nightmares central to Netanyahu's coalition, with another key constituency being the ultra-Orthodox. Now, one of that group's biggest concerns is preserving a religious exemption that allows them to skip the mandatory military service required of most young Israelis. That exemption is understandably pretty unpopular in Israel, with resentment only growing as the war in Gaza's dragged on. But Netanyahu's shown himself to be committed to delivering for his extremist partners. And a big flashpoint came in early 2023 when he moved against Israel's judiciary, specifically its Supreme Court. That is something that the far right has wanted for a bunch of reasons. The ultra-Orthodox were furious that the court had ruled against their military exemption, and the settlements crowd saw it as an obstacle to expansion in the West Bank. So Netanyahu, who, remember, was facing corruption charges, so had his own...
This seems a bit more forceful than you'd predicted. No, it's not. And the reason for why it's not is because if this was an accurate reflection of Israeli opinions, he would not. I mean, it's good. For the record, I need to say something here. This is very good, especially because this is a mainstream critique of Israeli society, and there is plenty of accurate reflections of Israeli history here and how ultra-Zionism has grown and basically taken the entire Israeli Knesset captive. But notice that the problem with this framework is that it's not necessarily just that the ultra-Zionists have taken the Israeli Knesset captive with their demands and that Benjamin Netanyahu is simply worried about keeping this coalition alive, and that's the reason why he's continuing the genocide, which is the thing that he's inferring, or the thing that he wants you to infer from this. The problem is, at the heart of this issue is Zionism. These guys are extremists, certainly, but they're extremists for other domestic considerations. They're not extremists from the perspective of what Israel is doing in Gaza. Okay? That's incredibly important for people to understand. A lot of people do not recognize when they look at Israeli society and they see from the outside like, oh, these guys are just extremists, like the rest of Israeli society doesn't actually care about this. No. These guys are extremists both on the domestic front and also the occupational agenda, certainly. But the Israeli society either turns a blind eye to the occupational extremism or actually welcome the occupational extremism. They just have disagreements on the domestic front. Okay? This is incredibly important to address, because if we do not address that Zionism is at the heart of this conflict, at the root of this genocide, Zionism is the reason why Israeli society broadly turns a blind eye to the humanity of the Palestinians. You will not be able to address the real reasons as to how Israel has been captured by these supposed far-right extremists. This is what's incredibly important, okay? Incredibly important.
Reasons to undermine the court, pushed for a judicial reform bill that had substantially reduced its oversight of government. And that move did not go down well with much of the Israeli public.
All day, protesters gathered in Jerusalem and other Israeli cities. They say it's not just that the proposed legislation would reduce judicial checks and balances on the government.
Yeah, this was a major point of contention that I addressed at the time when this was happening, right? Notice how every single person is still waving the Israeli flag, and Israeli society broadly was upset at the Supreme Court, but many advocates of the Palestinian cause at the time, myself included, pointed to this discontent only taking place because they had not realized the issue at the heart of this contradiction. The reason why Israeli society over the past 30 years has become more and more right-wing is because they are open to unlimited violence to the Palestinians. Okay? That is the connective tissue. That is the glue that holds Israeli society together. The occupation must continue. The expulsion must continue. The ethnic cleansing must continue because we have demographic concerns and security concerns. Okay? That is the reason why Israeli society has become more and more right-wing over these years. That's the reason why this Supreme Court decision was taking place to begin with. You can't have your treats, and in this situation, I'm referring to civil rights, okay? Civil rights for gay people, civil rights for all of the things that liberals care about. You can't have that because inevitably these right-wing forces will overtake Israeli society and completely control it. You can't have those civil rights because on the one hand, while you are advancing those causes, on the other hand, you're turning a blind eye to all of the humanity and the human rights of the Palestinian population.
But it would also rob Israel of its identity as a democracy. Maybe the most surreal protest was by Navy SEALs, reservist frogmen, who, like other members of the Israeli military, believe that the government's plans are undemocratic.
Yeah, people were so mad, they protested underwater. And you know things are getting bad when the protests start to stretch all the way to Bikini fucking Bottom. And that was where things stood for Netanyahu in early 2023. But then, of course, in October, things changed tragically when Hamas launched the worst terrorist attack in Israel's history, killing some 1,200 people and taking 251 hostages, 48 of whom are still held in Gaza today, with around 20 believed to still be alive. And look, no one would say Netanyahu personally caused October 7th, but he has definitely ensured that what's come after has caused exponentially more suffering.
I mean, I wouldn't say it was him personally, but I would say that Trump, the American government, and the Israeli government broadly caused it. And as a matter of fact, I'm not even alone in saying it. Plenty of people in Israel were saying it on October 8th, by the way. Like that was one of the craziest parts about this, is that like people were getting doxxed in America for writing an identical article to what like the Haaretz's editorial board had put forward, saying that Benjamin Netanyahu had gotten so horny with Itamar Ben-Gvir to move all the security forces of the West Bank and increase the pressure in spite of Shin Bet's consistent calls that this was going to create a boiling point for the Palestinian resistance groups as they had defined it clearly over and over again, and that on top of that, the aggressive actions both in the West Bank and in Gaza was inevitably going to invite response. You had people who had survived in the kibbutzim on October 7 saying that on like October 10, okay? There were plenty of people that actually said that.
That might otherwise have been the case.
This is before we even get to like the inconsistencies and the weirdness of it all, as far as like refusing to immediately respond to the security concerns once the Gaza border was penetrated. The Gaza boundary was penetrated.
As we've discussed before, for years, he deliberately allowed Qatar to funnel money into Gaza, literally sending suitcases full of money there in the backseats of cars. And he did this to try and keep Hamas in power, as it meant that he didn't have to deal with their more moderate rival, the Palestinian Authority. It was a massive gamble, and it is one that Israeli...
Again, I think this is also more complex than the way that John Oliver is presenting it, because the Palestinian Authority is broadly despised because it's like I said over and over again, it is considered, and it is actually a part of the Israeli security apparatus. It's not that they are moderate; it's that they are soldiers for Israel, right? Now, the miscalculation here, and this was regarded as a gamble, and I have covered it as such as well. The idea that you were going to give money to Hamas was for a very specific reason. The idea that Benjamin Netanyahu was propping up Hamas was because he knew that in the eyes of the Western world, Hamas would never achieve broad recognition. Hamas would never be able to achieve recognition. They could always be written off as Islamist fundamentalists, dangerous terrorists similar to ISIS. But the other thing that Benjamin Netanyahu and his cronies also miscalculated on was the notion that Hamas was just like they were. People that were more predisposed with maintaining their grip of power in the Gaza Strip, more so than any sort of higher need for emancipation. This was the major miscalculation. They thought Hamas would not be a uniting force for all of the Palestinian resistance forces. They were wrong on that front. October 7 was not just conducted by Hamas and Islamic Jihad. October 7 was conducted by the entirety of the Palestinian resistance forces. That's number one. So Hamas was a unifying factor here because Hamas, in the way that they presented it in Israel, in an Israeli society, was not actually simply a bunch of like corrupt autocrats that only wanted to fucking collect dollar bills and like control the real estate of the Gaza Strip. As a matter of fact, I feel like elements within PA are closer to that recognition than even Hamas was. Okay? The notion that Hamas was only interested in just like having their grip of power over the Gaza Strip and control the Palestinian population and all their needs was incorrect. Okay? This is very important to understand. This is precisely the reason why, and even in the 20-point peace plan that they fucking put forward, they're like, oh, we'll let you disarm and we'll allow you to leave the Gaza Strip if you choose to do so. That's what they said about Hamas militancy. They literally said, you can just escape the Gaza Strip. We'll let you leave. The idea that these guys were not first and foremost invested in ending the occupation of Israel was wrong. Okay? They are. Still, to this day. Do you agree with all of their tactics? I don't, but it doesn't matter. If we're talking about their goal, their overarching priority here, that is clear. It is clear that they are first and foremost primarily invested in ending the sovereignty of Israel over the Palestinian population. It's that simple. This is also precisely the reason why Israeli society broadly and Israeli media broadly kept presenting Yahya Sinwar, for example, as like a selfish person who had already escaped the Gaza Strip, that he was not actually experiencing the repercussions of October 7 at all, personally experiencing it at all, or that even if he was in the Gaza Strip, he was probably chained to a bunch of Israeli hostages, Israeli babies, and in an effort not to be bombed by Israel, as though Israel would stop themselves from killing Yahya Sinwar because there's Israeli hostages strapped to him. All of that was obviously a lie because we saw that Yahya Sinwar died fighting till his very last breath. And Israel itself did not even know that they had killed Yahya Sinwar until a day after. Okay? Conflating the political bureau in Qatar with fighters in Gaza. No, there's also that. However, even with the political bureau of Hamas, or the leadership of Hamas that's outside of the Gaza Strip, their family members are still in the Gaza Strip. Their family members have also been completely fucking destroyed, wiped out by Israel. So the notion that these guys have nothing to lose is also silly in that regard. This may be a cynical take, but I believe that what Hamas has accomplished may very well be the disintegration of Israel due to their genocidal tactics. But I do not think the Palestinian people at large will survive nor inherit it, unfortunately. I don't think that's that much of a cynical take. I think you're not. That is what we are trying to avoid. What we're trying to avoid is that reality, which is to ensure that the Palestinian civilians continue living in the Gaza Strip and living in the West Bank, and push for sovereignty and recognition of a real, true, independent Palestinian state. Yeah, Dropsite also is basically saying what I said earlier, by the way, as far as the peace plan goes, the so-called 20-point peace plan. For months, Israeli and U.S. officials have denied any starvation policy in Gaza, claiming enough food and medicine enter, even as the IPC declared famine in August for a quarter of the population, and aid groups reported the opposite. Buried in Netanyahu and Trump's 20-point plan is a striking admission. Aid is being withheld. Point 7, upon acceptance of this agreement, full aid will be immediately sent into the Gaza Strip. Do not let people get away with this. This is a full-blown recognition of what they have done. As I said when I covered earlier the 20-point peace plan, so-called peace plan. Israeli newspaper owned by the Adelson family, Israel Hayom, tells its readers, don't worry, Netanyahu won't abide by the deal anyway. It's already started. As I told you, this is what they were going to do.
Still talk about today in utter disbelief.
This money was spent on digging tunnels and buying rockets and producing weapons, now killing Israelis. While Netanyahu was telling us that he was our great protector, he was actually contributing, not directly, to building Hamas and making it a regional power.
It's true, Netanyahu was secretly helping beef up the very organisation that he claimed to be protecting Israelis against, and he was open about his thinking here. He once told a prominent Israeli journalist that a strong Hamas was actually a good thing, as it meant a divided Palestinian government, which would lessen the pressure on him to negotiate toward a Palestinian state. And sure.
Yeah, okay. I'm glad that he at least mentioned that part. But this is twofold. Once again. It's because he thought Hamas was like a corrupt force that wasn't really invested in undermining Israeli sovereignty and was simply invested in like being in a position of power. Okay, like any act that Hamas took or any act that Islamic Jihad took against whenever they were like lobbing missiles over the boundary, right, that would quickly get intercepted. Israel saw that as like, oh, these guys are just flexing because they want to be more popular, because they want to control the Palestinian population. They didn't realize that was, they didn't realize that all of those reactions were because Hamas was trying to enforce some kind of detente, some kind of restriction, or some kind of repercussion for Israel's actions in the West Bank. Okay? The thing that I don't appreciate about John Oliver's coverage here is that it basically, once again, whether this is deliberate or not, and I don't think it's deliberate. I think this is just a Western focus on this issue. So many people just like don't understand the complexities of I guess, Palestinian existence or their own personal ambitions here. It's like virtually impossible for them to dive a little bit deeper into the subject matter. But this makes it seem as though the Palestinian Authority is just a more moderate force that every Palestinian would be perfectly happy with existing under, and that Hamas is this like incredibly militant force that's like devastating for the Palestinian population. Now, for the record, Hamas is also not exactly the most popular force in terms of governance either. There are a million different reasons as to why people might not like who rules over them. Do you like the Trump administration, for example? No, but the Trump administration rules over us, okay? There are a million different domestic reasons as to why the Palestinians would not be happy with Hamas as well. This isn't to say that like Hamas is the most popular figure either. It's just more popular than the Palestinian Authority. And the reason for why it's more popular than the Palestinian Authority is because of its militancy, its militant response against Israel. Because Palestinians broadly understand that they've been pushed into a corner and that the peace talks, the so-called peace talks, have been an abject fucking failure. And of course, just as the American sanctions regime against enemies of the United States are done so to invite some sort of resistance against the leadership, whether it be Maduro in Venezuela or whether it be the Cuban government in Cuba, the Israeli blockade has understandably also created a tremendous amount of anger and resentment towards the governing party which happens to be Hamas. But even in the last elections that were concluded in the Gaza Strip, the calculation made by many Palestinians, which is a very diverse, like ideologically diverse society, and is nowhere near as like Islamist fundamentalists as like Westerners present it as, the calculation was not done on Hamas and its domestic affairs. Like they were like, oh yeah, we want to have like some sort of like morality police or whatever the fuck the Westerners presented as. It was done because Hamas at the time was seen as a less corruptible force. A vote for Hamas at that time was a vote against corruption, because Fatah, and this is their own recognition in 2006, Fatah itself had told George W. Bush that they were not ready for an election at all because Palestinian society broadly despised the Fatah leadership and the Palestinian Authority because they saw the Palestinian Authority as a collaborative force with the Israeli security apparatus. They saw the PA and they saw Fatah as corrupt. They saw Hamas as uncorruptible.
If something's a threat, why not make it more dangerous? It's like the classic advice. If you're ever threatened by a bear, give the bear a gun as part of a long-term strategy to make negotiation with that bear less diplomatically feasible. What is the worst that could happen? But that's not the only way in which Netanyahu underestimated Hamas's threat. He also reportedly blew off a warning from Israel's internal security chief that the country faced a challenge at its doorstep with Hamas, which Netanyahu dismissed, arguing that Hamas had been deterred. And that is a statement that has frankly aged worse than when Ellen had shirts that said, "Be kind to one another."
He also said it was woke nonsense. I think that's a funnier quote, that a Bibi envoy famously told the Shin Bet that it was woke nonsense when the Shin Bet leaders were saying, the Shin Bet chiefs were saying, like, your pressure on the West Bank is inviting militant response, the likes we've never seen before in Israeli history. And they literally said this was woke deep state nonsense.
Or when Eric Adams gave Sean Combs the key to New York City in 2023. Or when Colbert Show released this interview on YouTube and titled it, Army Hammer ate NYC street meat and lives to eat another day. And now, Israel is embroiled in a war which, according to Human Rights Watch, Amnesty...
What is this? I haven't seen you give a single reason why Zionism is supremacist. Listen to Hasan is not a reason. Israel's a Nazi state is true, but not a reason. Zionism is supremacist. If you're trying to understand why Zionism is an ethno-religious supremacist ideology, look no further than the way that non-Jews are treated, even when they have citizenship in Israel. 100%. Zionism, from its inception to its final solution defense at this point, has always been an ethno-religious supremacist ideology. Israel is an ethno-state. Israel has a grand design for expansion as an ethno-state. Here, I'll give you a great example. Israeli society has two designations in its own demographics. This is not my association. This is just simply theirs. Jew and Arab. This means that Armenian Christians are still bracketed under Arab, despite the fact that they're not Arab. Why? This also means that the Mizrahi and the Sephardic Jews, who are of Arab and sometimes Spanish descent, are also considered Jewish under the Israeli society's demographic designs. Itamar Ben-Gvir is a great example of this. Itamar Ben-Gvir himself is Mizrahi. He is a Kurdish Iraqi Jew. And yet, in Israeli society, he is considered Jew and not Arab. As a matter of fact, if you were to talk to an Israeli Jewish person that has his direct ancestry tied back to any of the MENA nation states in the surrounding region, they would get offended if you were to say you're an Arab Jew. They would say, I'm not Arab. You can't be Arab and Jew. You can only be Jew. Arab means non-Jew. Why? Why is this the demographic designation that the Israeli state has designed? It is because being Jewish is placed in a higher priority for the Israeli ethno-state. Judaism is an ethno-religion, of course, and therefore, if you are Jewish, even if you're from Turkey, even if you're from Iraq, even if you're from Tunisia, even if you're from Algeria, if you are Jewish, you are considered a Jew in Israel. And if you are from any other place around the planet and you are non-Jewish, then you are designated as Arab or non-Jew. Yeah, I mean, also, Knesset extends law banning Palestinian family unification for another year. So-called citizenship law, passed in 2003 at the height of the Second Intifada, introduces a temporary security measure, but has since been renewed annually. This is from the 6th of March, 2023. You understand? Did that person actually recognize something here, and that's why he's being quiet? I don't know.
Scores of experts and an independent commission at the UN constitutes a genocide. In fact, last year, the ICC issued arrest warrants for Netanyahu and others, charging them with war crimes. But of course, his supporters didn't quite see it that way.
This doesn't really have any validity. Netanyahu and the Israeli Defense Force are doing their very, very, very best for the state of Israel. And I'm sorry that the Hague and the International Court cannot appreciate that.
Okay. A pretty good sign that you're not in the right is if you find yourself saying, I'm sorry that the Hague and the International Court cannot appreciate that, no matter what comes before it. If she had said, The Roses is a witty exploration of the trials of modern marriage, and I'm sorry the Hague and the International Court cannot appreciate that, it would be fair to wonder, what the fuck was in that movie? And responses like that are especially wild once you learn the extent to which Netanyahu has been personally responsible for keeping this war going. Reporting's found that at key stages, his decisions extended the fighting in Gaza longer than even Israel's military leadership deemed necessary. For instance, just this March, he broke a ceasefire and blamed Hamas's refusal to release more hostages before negotiations could proceed, even though that was not part of the ceasefire agreement. In reality, it was actually Netanyahu caving to far-right ministers like Smotrich who had threatened, if, God forbid, the war is not resumed, I will bring the government down. Even now, Netanyahu's forged ahead with a ground offensive to take Gaza City over the objections of his own military leaders and in defiance of global condemnation. Now, as for Smotrich, he's openly talking about the annexation of Gaza. Just listen to him outline those plans at a conference last week in the grossest possible terms.
There's a business plan set by the most professional people there is and is on President Trump's table, and how this thing turns into a real estate bonanza. I'm not kidding, it pays off. I have started negotiations with the Americans. I say this not jokingly now because I also demand. We paid a lot of money for this war, so we need to divide how we make a percentage on the land marketing later in Gaza. And now, no kidding, we've done the demolition phase, which is always the first phase of urban renewal. Now we need to build.
Holy shit! He's referring to mass murder and displacement as urban renewal. That is stretching a euphemism to breaking point. It's basically like calling the Trail of Tears high-speed mass transit. That is not remotely what that was. And again, it is impossible to overstate the death and suffering Netanyahu's decisions have caused to the over 65,000 Palestinians who are dead, the thousands of children who are amputees, and the thousands more who are starving, but also to the Israeli hostages who've either died or are still being held because of his refusal to prioritise their safety and freedom. It is all truly horrifying, and somehow, in the midst of all this, in June he launched yet another war attacking Iran, claiming they were on the verge of developing a nuclear weapon, something that he's been claiming for 3 fucking decades now. And even after a US-brokered ceasefire was supposed to put a stop to the hostilities, Netanyahu continued to antagonise Iran, which finally seemed to wear on Trump's patience.
Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I've never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel. You know what? We basically have 2 countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the fuck they're doing. Do you understand that?
Yeah, he is pissed there. Though I guess that shouldn't be that surprising. It's one of the 6 moods Trump displays in public. There's pissed, bored, asleep, a little horny, a lot horny, blissed out on the energy of a cheering crowd, and momentarily oblivious to the crushing void that yawns within him, and of course, pissed formal edition. Perhaps because of Trump's irritation, though, not long after that, Netanyahu nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize and went on Trump's favourite news network to say this.
The Milk
if
Boys?
Anyone deserves the Nobel Peace Prize.
I thought he was going to show Milk Boys.
It's President Trump. First of all, he brokered with me the historic Abraham Accords, in which Israel made peace with 4 Arab states. I think that deserves maybe 4 Nobel Prizes for him.
Look, I don't know what is more embarrassing there, how thick he's laying on the flattery or how likely it is to work. You know, I'd give Trump an extra large Nobel Prize, a super Nobel, if you will, and instead of that dead Swede on the side, it'd have a chick with huge bazongas. That'd be more appropriate to Mr. Trump's greatness. Look, it is very clear that Netanyahu's desperate to stay in power and will do whatever it takes, which on a personal level makes sense. If you are facing a potential prison term, you probably want every bit of leverage you can get to avoid that happening. But some Israelis do recognise the dynamic at work here and are understandably furious about it. Just look at this coverage of a protest there last month.
Well, these protesters in the centre of Tel Aviv are absolutely furious at their government's decision to expand its military operations inside the Gaza Strip.
This one says Bibi betrays the fighters. Bibi betrays the soldiers, the fighters. He sends them to die. He sends them to fight.
I don't think, I mean, all of this also quite literally shows that this is not like a pro-Palestinian sentiment at these protests. This quite literally shows the naked face of liberal Zionism and all of the criticisms that are against Benjamin Netanyahu.
He sends them to commit war crimes, and all for what? For what?
This is why I've always been an advocate, for the record, of BDS and initiatives such as that one to present, to heighten Israel's pariah state status, because those are the people that will not resist against Benjamin Netanyahu's war or genocide But they will if their regular existence is threatened. They will do that if they can no longer withstand an academic boycott, for example. They will if they feel like they can't just go to fucking Greece or Cyprus without people turning around and being like, oh, you're fucking Israeli? Fuck you. They will if they can no longer participate in UEFA. They will if they can no longer participate in Eurovision. They will absolutely, for selfish reasons, decide that the apartheid cannot continue. Okay? You said that the Israeli society is severely censored. Is that partially why they don't advocate against genocide specifically? No, there are people who advocate against genocide. It's more so a lack of appetite to recognize the humanity of Palestinians and to recognize the genocide that's unfolding. This doesn't mean that there aren't people who are anti-Zionist Jews in Israel. There are plenty of them. There's almost all of them are in my chat at any given moment. Having said that, they are the first people that will recognize how incredibly reactionary Israeli society is and how incredibly fascist Israeli society has become. I think especially Americans in this community should understand that better than anybody else, because America is also bouldering in the direction of full-blown fascism. And for us, the inherent contradiction and the first violence comes from a lack of recognition of the indigenous genocide and a lack of recognition for the harms of chattel slavery in its current contemporary form, like the continued destruction campaign that is taking place against all migrants, okay, black and brown and even sometimes white. Like, the less we push back against these sorts of initiatives from the current fascist Trump administration, the more of a foothold that they gain in terms of advancing the society in a fascist direction.
Supporters say it's to make Israel safer.
Well, no, it's to make Bibi safe, and they believe that when Bibi's safe, we're safe. But I believe the opposite.
Yeah, I believe that too. And the thing is, that's kind of the problem with electing someone because he's an arsehole son of a bitch. You do wind up being governed by someone who's an arsehole and a son of a bitch. The point is, Netanyahu is not popular in Israel, and he's increasingly unpopular here too. A new poll found just 21% of Americans have a favourable view of him. Meanwhile, support for Palestinian statehood is currently at 58% in the US, and just recently a wave of countries, including France, the UK, Canada, and...
For the record, that is like incredibly low. I'm gonna be honest.
Australia all officially recognised a Palestinian state. In fact, as this map shows, the US is now one of the few countries and the only permanent member of the UN Security Council that doesn't. And sure, Netanyahu might claim that he can easily push America back into supporting him, but I don't know if that's true this time. I think people have seen a little too much at this point. And let me be clear, to attribute the atrocities in Gaza to just one man would be naive. It'd also ignore that while many Israelis vehemently disagree with choices that Netanyahu's made, there's also a fair amount of consensus there when it comes to deeper issues like the inevitability of
I'm glad he said that.
ongoing Israeli occupation in general and the acceptability of denying self-determination to Palestinians. Those are conversations and issues that are going to take much longer and be much harder to resolve. But in the short term, Israelis removing this fucking guy from power might at the very least bring a stop to the horrific suffering in Gaza and bring the hostages home. The next election there is scheduled to occur by next October, though if Netanyahu's coalition ruptures, it could be earlier. But whenever it happens, to anyone in Israel who thinks, like that woman, that he is just doing his best to protect the country, or that the ends justify the means,
So the only thing that I agree with in terms of like Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition imploding is that it makes it all the more, it makes it harder for Israel to very quickly recover from that and to continue its genocidal campaign. Do I have any belief whatsoever that what comes next in the aftermath of Benjamin Netanyahu, if the opposition could get their shit together with like Yair Lapid and Benny Gantz and secure some sort of coalition, would they continue the death and destruction campaign, or if they were able to do so in a swift fashion, do I believe that they would continue the death and destruction campaign? Absolutely. Abso-fucking-lutely. I've been covering the Israeli opposition and how little they actually oppose the genocide over and over and over again. Okay? Ironically enough, Benjamin Netanyahu's own Likud party members, former Likud members, have been more critical of the genocide from the perspective of the humanity of Palestinians than the current opposition party. Okay? It's just anyone that refuses to recognize that is oblivious to this reality. Okay? So the only thing that is good about changing Israeli governance away, like taking the power away from Benjamin Netanyahu, is that it would make it harder for Israel to continue its genocide, at least. So any sort of gumming of the works, I am in support of, which is precisely the reason why I have also supported the rallies that have taken place over and over again, even if they're not comprised of like militant anti-Zionists, and instead are liberal Zionists who actually don't have an issue with what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing in Gaza, but simply want to take the hostages out, and then they're fine with the continuation of the genocide. I still don't care because any little bit helps. Do you understand? Like any kind of instability has the capacity to make the Israeli politicians recalculate, just like any kind of pressure in the Western world and any kind of separation of Western powers away from the United States and its unlimited loyalty to Israel will make the American government recalculate its loyalty to Israel as it continues its genocide. Every little bit helps. Okay? How do people not understand that this is our internal politics if we have more selected enemy and a competent Hitler in power? Yeah. Israel is our future.
He is somehow the babysitter everybody needs. It is worth asking, just who is Netanyahu really looking out for? Is it the people of Israel who've been put at risk by endless war? Or is it the man who spent 17 years as prime minister and seems willing to do whatever it takes to squeeze out a...
If Zionism, this guy's still going. If Zionism has always been supremacist, why can't a form of Zionism exist that doesn't deny rights? Your logic is can't ever change. Why not? Zionism is fascism, brother. I don't know why it's so fucking hard for you to comprehend. Maybe it's because Jews were the victims of the Holocaust alongside many others, but that's probably the reason why it's so hard for you to think about it as anything but like Jewish self-determination. Okay, but it wouldn't be Zionism if it factored in all of the other people in the outgroup as full-blown human beings and citizens of whatever state that remains in this region. Okay, that's my advocacy. My advocacy is for a singular, solitary, secular nation state that gives the Palestinians a right to return and offers reparations to the Palestinians for the harm that they have experienced over the course of the past 100 fucking years. Okay? That's what I believe. And the reason why I advocate for one state is because I believe that the two-state conversation has already created one state, one sovereign Israeli state that has designed Bantustans and ghettoized Palestinians into a non-contiguous state in the West Bank and another open-air concentration camp that is currently being ethnically cleansed by Israel right now in Gaza Strip. Just as there cannot be a form of white supremacist Nazism that actually factors the humanity of all of those who are in the outgroup that must be excised and cast aside. Dude, do you think this is an appropriate time? It's time to lock back in on that diet and thirst trap again, Unc. Do you think 32-month subscriber? While I'm in the process of describing Israel's genocidal design, do you feel like this is an appropriate time to bring this in? Like, there's other times where you can do that, but...
few more. I would argue that it is the second one. And I, for one, am looking forward to the day that Netanyahu is politically done. Because if and when that day finally comes, it truly will be time to break out the, in words that I'm pretty sure Netanyahu would understand, the roses and the fucking leaves.
Anyway, it's fine. It's not my favorite coverage, but it's pretty good for mainstream news. I was right about like not going hard enough. Here's some criticism. John Oliver's latest episode explains Netanyahu's grip on power in Israel. I absolutely love John Oliver and generally thought this episode was pretty solid, but here are some of my comments. Firstly, I really appreciated that he and his team used great domestic reporting from Ronan Bergman and Amos Harel. Not a big fan of Ronan Bergman, by the way, but whatever. Covering many of the internal crises which characterize Bibi's tenure and Sarah's insanity, though he didn't mention some of the funniest stuff, including his fail son, Yair. I thought his coverage of Bibi's incitement following Rabin's signing of the Oslo Accords and his dedication to the thwarting peace process was sharp and poignant. He very excellently and succinctly distilled why the Abraham Accords were so problematic. Some small details I wish he'd mentioned. Two Israeli organizations, B'Tselem and PHR Israel, have also said that Israel's actions meet the criteria for genocide. Trump's reckless decision to pull out of the JCPOA he mentioned at the time, but it's relevant here. I wish he discussed that a key reason the opposition against Bibi has failed to end his reign is in part due to the fact that they are committed to the exclusion of the Arab parties and more broadly, the PCAL protests against them, which face far more repression and violence. Americans in general, I think, are unaware that the systematic disdain for Palestinians affects not only people in the occupied Palestinian territories, but also 20% of Israeli citizens. This is huge. This is very important. This also goes back to the same thing that I said about the distinction between liberal Zionism and anti-Zionism and the importance of recognizing that Zionism is a fascist ideology. Zionism is not about like having peaceful means to develop a Jewish state in an area that was a land without people for a people without land, right? That's a lie. It's built on a lie. Palestinian citizens of Israel are an important and often overlooked part of Israel's political story. I think this might also help contextualize the gap between much of the Israeli public hates Netanyahu and much of Israeli public is indifferent to the Palestinian suffering in Gaza. All that said, I'm really glad that John Oliver did this piece, and I applaud him for continuing to cover this issue with moral clarity. Also, I am not sure what or how much would change in Gaza were Bibi to lose the next election. Of course, I want him out too, but his successor will likely be someone like Naftali Bennett, who shares Bibi's jingoistic vision. The country still leans heavily rightwards. The domination of the Palestinian population, both in the West Bank and in Gaza, and the Palestinian citizens of Israel, what the Israeli society broadly calls Arabs, the internal domination of them and the external, if you want to consider it to be like an external conquest. I think it's still a reflection of Israeli sovereignty, a violent design that they've created for all people who are non-Jews in the region. As long as that is left unaddressed, this will be the connective tissue that holds all of the different coalitions within Israeli politics together. They have differences in domestic affairs, but as long as they still demonstrate loyalty to the IDF and do not see it as a genocidal force or a violent force, and that will never happen because from seculars all the way to the Orthodox, they consider the IDF to be this separate moral fixture of Israeli society, for the record. Okay, but as long as there is no recognition of the apartheid design or the genocide that is going on, as long as Israeli society broadly still considers all kinds of violence that the Palestinians are subjected to be appropriate, or at least one that they can just ignore, nothing will change for the Palestinians, and Israeli society will continue to go further and further right-wing. And in that further creep towards the right, the liberal Zionists will also consistently lose their civil liberties as well. Something that John Oliver literally mentioned when he talked about the Supreme Court protests. Okay? This is very, very important. What is this? In this sense, Oliver, while having to be sure line about its limitations, is still promoting the one bad man theory, a liberal cope that takes outrage and channels into vague hand-wringing about internal dynamics within Israel rather than a call to support BDS plus an arms embargo. Yeah. I do see that.